Let's switch gears a little bit, Scott. I've been reading that Poland is on the edge. Basically, they're very nervous about how closely the Wagner mercenary group that's now housed in Belarus is to the Belarusian border, close to the Poland side. Is there beef between Poland and Russia, or is this just Poland being defensive of Ukraine and that's provoking Russia? Or do you have any history or backstory on why they would be so nervous about the Wagner mercenary group, or is it just that this killing machine is so close to the border?
Well, I respect Polish military professionals and I respect Polish intelligence professionals. Not politicians, but professionals. And any military professional and an intelligence professional will make the following assessment about Wagner in Belarus. One, there's only 8,000 of them. Two, they're lightly armed. They've been disarmed of their heavy weaponry. Three, they operate within a mandate set forth by their relationship with the Belarus government. Four, the Belarus government is not looking for a fight with Poland. Five, the Belarus government has an agreement with Russia not to allow Wagner to reconstitute itself in a way that mirrors that which existed in the Donbass in June of this year, when Wagner carried out what was a de facto insurrection against the Russian government. So when you add all that up, you can't view Wagner as a military threat. They're not a military threat. The scope and scale of the violence taking place in Ukraine today, we're talking about, armies that are hundreds of thousands strong, well equipped with artillery and everything. What made Wagner an effective fighting force wasn't just the skill, the tactical skill of the individual Wagner fighter and the operational proficiency of the Wagner commanders, but they were backed up by the might of the Russian military. They had tanks. Wagner doesn't have tanks. It's a private military contractor. Wagner does not own a tank factory that produces Wagner tanks. Wagner received tanks from the Russian Ministry of Defense to support their combat operations in the Donbass. Wagner no longer has tanks. Wagner had artillery, or was provided artillery support by Russian units operating adjacent to it. Wagner no longer has that. They don't have artillery ammunition. If they have small arms, meaning individual weapons, they're going to be individual weapons that are issued to them by the Belarus government, because Wagner has turned over all of the Ministry of Defense property back to the Russian Ministry of Defense. So what Wagner was in the Donbass is not what it is in Belarus. But one of the key aspects of Wagner is that there is a certain mythology that's been built around them, that they are somehow this extraordinarily deadly, superhuman killing machine. And that's why you can start a rumor that says 100 Wagner fighters moved towards the Suwalki Gap, that is this border zone between Poland and Lithuania that connects Belarus with the Russian enclave of Kaliningrad. 100 Wagner fighters went there, and Poland went into a panic. And in that, Wagner's very good. Wagner has established a certain mystique, and they want to continue that mystique. That's why Lukashenko, the president of Belarus, joked with Vladimir Putin last month about, Wagner guys are hungry. They're looking at Warsaw. They're thinking maybe they'll go to Warsaw for a vacation or something like that. And Poles heard that and started panicking. Well, Wagner's not going to Warsaw. There's not enough of them. If anybody understands what modern warfare is like, the notion that 8,000 Wagner guys, even if, say, you beefed it up to 20,000, that's not going to have any impact. Wagner's number one mission right now is Africa. The Belarus training mission is a holding pattern for them on the ground in Belarus, where they're establishing a new base of operations. But their money maker and where they're doing most of their fighting today is in Africa, where they have significant presence in the Central African Republic, extensive presence in Mali, They're in the Sudan. They're in Libya. They're in Chad. There's talk that they may be in Burkina Faso. They could get involved in Niger. All these places are currently in the news right now where there's the makings of a big, large-scale war between a pro-Russian bloc of nations and a pro-American French bloc of nations. Africa, the African continent, is on the cusp of a war that, when you look at the territory involved, would make the war in Ukraine pale by comparison. And Wagner's there. They're at the center of that. That's where Wagner's at. That's where their focus of effort is. This stuff in Belarus is just a sideshow, and they're having some fun. The Poles are in the business right now of trying to double the size of their army. They're trying to justify hundreds of billions of dollars of expenditure of weapons. In order to do that, you need a threat. And Wagner provides a politically useful threat model that the Poles can use as a fear factor to generate or justify military expenditure. But Wagner's not a threat to Poland and Belarus.
Okay, thank you for that. Putin recently said that Ukraine is losing 10 times as many soldiers as Russia, and that this won't end well for Ukraine. Have you found those numbers to be accurate? Was recent battles a 10-to-1 ratio? Because I know in Bakhmut it was around 7-to-1. Is it this recent Zaporizhia and some of these other big battles that are in the news? Are they really as high as a 10 death to 1 ratio?
Absolutely. In some cases, it could be even higher. It's the Ukrainian military has been given a mission impossible. If the United States Marine Corps, which I consider to be the finest fighting force on the face of the earth, was given the task of breaching Russian defensive lines, we could do so, but we would take heavy casualties. But we would do so using a tremendous amount of firepower that Ukraine doesn't have right now. And we would have to achieve artillery supremacy, meaning that we put more artillery fire bear on them than they put on us. It's a tough thing to do, given the fact that the Russians have more artillery tubes than anybody in the world. We would supplement our artillery with close air support. That's going to be a very difficult thing to do because of the Russian integrated air defenses. This would be a major military effort requiring the best combat force in the world, the Marine Corps, working together with overwhelming air support and firepower support, artillery support. The Ukrainians are not the finest fighting force in the world. The troops that are going into battle now, many of them have 21 days basic training, then a few more weeks of operational training. They're trying to master combat techniques, combined arm techniques that take American soldiers and Marines years to master. They're trying to master it in a matter of weeks. You can't. It's absurd. It's the same thing if I tried to take someone and teach them how to be a brain surgeon, just by showing them videos of all this stuff, and then suddenly I bring in a patient that has a massive head trauma, and I say, "Sure, the patient." That patient's going to die because the brain surgeon that only saw videos is incapable of doing this. You need someone who's gone through medical school, been trained to specifically do that, has sat in on surgeries, understands what they're doing, etc. Ukraine's not that. They don't have the air power. They're never going to get the air power. Even the F-16s that we're talking about giving them right now, we're talking about 12 to 24. For the F-16 to have any meaningful impact on the battlefield, you're going to need 200 or 300 of them. They're not there. The pilots will have no training, useful training. It takes 6 months to get them up just basic skill sets, and then you have to teach them how to do things like suppression of enemy air defense, close air support, air-to-air engagements, and they have to be proficient in all because they're going to be called upon to do all, and they're going to accomplish none. So they don't have air power. Their artillery. One of the things at the battle for Bakhmut, you brought it up earlier. One thing that happened there is that Ukrainians not only fired the majority of their 155 millimeter artillery ammunition reserves, so they depleted the reserves that were needed to support the counterattack. They burned through the tubes. To give you an example, in Syria, the Marine Corps, U.S. Marines were providing fire support in the final phases of the fight against ISIS. And the Marine artillery tubes, 155 millimeter M777 tubes, they were firing thousands of rounds downrange, and they burned out their barrels. So the barrels now are useless. if you continue to use them, there's going to be a chance that the barrel is going to explode, burst, or because it's no longer has the tolerances in there, the round coming out is going to be spinning off in a different direction. It's going to be very inaccurate. Well, the Ukrainians have burned out almost all their barrels. They've got no new barrels, and they don't have the luxury of pulling their artillery out, sending it back to Europe to get new barrels, because we don't have new barrels to give them. Nobody planned on this. It's not there. So their artillery is burned out, running out of ammo. It's a bad deal. And so the Ukrainians simply can't do the task that they've been given. Now, and we know this. We know that they can't do it. We trained them knowing they're incapable of accomplishing this task. The Russians, on the other hand, they can do everything that they want to do. They have the proper training, the proper equipment. They're motivated. The Ukrainians right now, we're dealing with troops that are being dragged off the streets. You asked if the casualty figures are believable. I've been saying for some time now that my personal calculations, looking at things and crunching data, leads me to believe that the Ukrainian dead are between 280 and 320,000 known killed in action. But I also acknowledge that there's about 80,000 missing, 80 to 90,000 missing in action, of whom the vast majority are dead but abandoned on the battlefield. So if we say 80,000, we call it 60,000 missing on the battlefield. We take that 60,000, add it to 380,000, you get 340,000. You add it to 320, you get 380,000. A new report just came out based upon internal Ukrainian data that talks about nearly 400,000 dead. So I think my numbers are spot on. I think it's very likely the Ukrainians have suffered these casualties, and the Ukrainians can't even hide it anymore. People are looking at the growth of the cemeteries right now in Ukraine. They've just grown exponentially by orders of magnitude as the bodies that are brought home are put in the ground. They're running out of space to put them in. This is a tragedy. 10-1, absolutely. I think on bad days for the Ukrainians, so because 10-1 implies a normal pace of combat operations. The Ukrainians right now are actually trying to force the issue by pushing more and more troops in an effort to break the will of the Russian defenders. It's not working. I think right now, in some days, you're going to be looking at 12, 13, 14, 15-1 casualty ratios. The Ukrainians are on track to easily lose 500,000 men dead by the end of this summer.
Wow, such a tragedy. I don't know if you saw this, but I read today that Russia is being accused of sewing or fastening landmines to dead Ukrainian soldiers so that as they come to get their bodies, that person is then blown up. Have you read anything like that? Is this war propaganda, or is this just the ugly side of war?
I can tell you, when I was in the Marine Corps, one of the things, we took we had extensive training on mines, on how to employ them, tactical and operational standpoint, how to physically do it, how to probe, how to find them, how to take them apart. Because if you're in combat, you will run across minefields and you have to deal with them. And we were taught to booby trap them. I have to tell you that when I was taught to put in an anti-tank round underneath it, I had another mine pressure plated to it so that if you disarm this one and you move it, the other one goes off and kills the person doing it. We were taught to do that. We were taught to set booby traps. We were never taught to booby trap bodies, but we're always taught that the enemy would booby trap bodies, that we had to treat every body potentially. This is why when you come across a body, you put a grappling hook and you try and roll the body off to see if there's a grenade hidden underneath there and all that stuff. I can't confirm the Ukrainian reports, but it's not unbelievable, and it's not a war crime. I mean, there might be a lawyer out there who's going to correct me on that one, but I'm just telling you that we were trained about that possibility back in 1984, 1985, 86. And I would just imagine that possibility still exists to this day. The more important story here isn't that they're doing that, because what's happening right now is that the Ukrainians are they went away from the NATO large scale armor attacks because they got slaughtered. So they started going to a primarily infantry mode of attack where small tactical groups would fight forward to take forward trench lines. And so what the Russians would do is engage, and then they'd pull back. But before they pull back, they'd mine the trenches. So you've seen the videos of the Ukrainians coming in, jumping into Russian trenches and just blowing themselves all up. And that's frustrating for the Ukrainians because that's the end of the attack. Everybody's dead, wounded, dying. The Russians are very good at using landmines as part of their defense. Their defense posture. They do a number of things. One, they lay these landmines out everywhere. There's massive belts of them. You can't avoid them. If you take a look at the Ukrainians, as soon as they leave the beaten track, they blow up. They're hitting landmines. And when they blow it up, the next vehicle tries to go around them. It gets blown up. Next thing you know, you got 5 vehicles online because they've hit a minefield that's that deep. And then what happens is as they clear the minefields, the Russians are firing these artillery-delivered mines into the areas behind the Ukrainians. So they're mining the route in. So when the Ukrainians, as they inevitably have always done, end up saying enough's enough and they're retreating backwards, they're running into Russian mines, going back on places that they thought that there would be no mines. The Russians are just very, very good and very, very effective at this. Are they mining dead bodies? Maybe. But, I think that's just a deflection by the Ukrainians into trying to explain away why the Russians are defeating everything they throw at them. The Ukrainians can't even get to the first line of Russian defenses. They're being blown up by the minefields, but they're also being blown up by anti-tank guided missiles, by Fab 250, Fab 500 air-delivered bombs, by Russian artillery, by Russian tanks. There's a now famous video, or infamous if you're on the side of Ukraine, where a single Russian tank rushed forward and destroyed 2 Ukrainian tanks and 6 armored or 6 personnel carriers. It was an 8-1 fight, and the Russians won, killed all 8. That's happening all the time right now, and the Ukrainians are just, frankly speaking, embarrassed by it. So they're going to spin different aspects of this fight in a way that makes the Russians look bad. But ultimately, at the end of the day, when the Russians are holding the ground, the Ukrainians are retreating. It's only the Ukrainians that look bad.
Yeah. On our last interview, we talked about Odessa and Crimea, the fact that there was going to be a greater emphasis on those southern port cities. I'm reading that, with this whole grain situation, that now Russia is saying, hey, we're going to supply free grain to Africa. Is this a way of them digging deeper into Africa, or is this a humanitarian mission, or what would be the reason behind Russia wanting to give Africa free grain while at the same time continuing to block Ukraine from exporting their own grain?
Well, here's the issue. The Ukrainian grain, the vast majority of it wasn't going to the countries in need, because that's not how World Food Aid works. World Food Aid works because people have allocated money to the organizations that provide food. Those organizations take that money and they buy specialized food products, whether it be paste, this paste they use to feed kids, the flour, the grain, or whatever. But they buy that with the money. It's not as though somebody comes in and says, "Here's all the food, go deliver it." They say, "Here's the money. Go buy the food you need and get it to where it needs to go." So the key aspect here is the stability of the price of food. The majority of the grains coming out of Ukraine were going to Europe, which last time I checked, they're not starving. But what's the importance of that? By keeping Europe supplied with food, global commodity prices are kept at a reasonable level. The price of food is kept at a reasonable level, which means that the money that these humanitarian groups have buys more food. When you cut off the Ukrainian grain, you cut off a supply of food to Europe, the price of food in Europe goes high. And Europe is going around the world trying to buy up food to replace that, which means there's more competition for the resource. The price even goes higher. And now the humanitarian groups are sitting there with this money, and the money's not buying what it needs to buy. And so the food isn't going to get to the places it needs to get, which is in Africa. Russia can't resolve this issue unless it gives into the international demand that it allow grains to flow out of Ukraine. That's the only way you're going to get food prices down. So to compensate for that, what Russia is saying is that we're going to take the food directly to the nations that need it. We're going to supply the food free of charge to the nations that need it in an effort to get the product to where it goes. But it's a short-term solution with potentially long-term negative impact, because what Russia's doing is operating outside of an international system to provide food aid to people in need. And that system will atrophy, will break down, will fall apart. And at some point in time, when this war ends, Russia's not going to be in the business of providing free food forever. They're going to turn back to these international organizations and say, okay, it's on you now to do this. But they're going to say, well, we can't do it anymore because you broke us. I think Russia will be able to get away with this for a year. I think Russia is putting the pressure on the West. And you already see the talk taking place, even the United States, saying we need to find a way to give Russia what they want on this one so that they start selling the grain again, because this is an issue with global repercussions. And any smart person who looks at this issue will realize that the fault doesn't lie with Russia, but the fault lies with the West, which failed to do anything that it promised the Russians, allowing fertilizer to flow, the ammonia to flow, allowing Russia to get its crops to market. We shut it all down. We claimed that this grain deal was going to be, it's not just about getting Ukrainian grain to market, it's about getting Russian grain, but more importantly, in some instances, getting Russian fertilizer to market. If you don't fertilize your fields during this year, next year there's going to be no crops. And many places of the world that grow this food have been denied access to the fertilizers that Russia produces. And so it's not just Russia getting grain to these people. Russia's been delivering fertilizer for free to people. But the United States and Europe has been blocking ports, blocking Russian ships in European ports that have this fertilizer on it, not letting it go, denying Russia the ability to engage in international commerce related to the sale or at least the movement and supply of this fertilizer. And so there's many farmers out there right now that aren't fertilizing their soil, and they're going to have very bad crops next year. And that's going to be problematic too, because that'll be less food. So Russia's been saying, you got to let us do what you said you were going to let us do. And until you do that, we're not going to let you enrich yourselves and enrich Ukraine in a one-way street. The deal has to be that which we had agreed to. And even the Secretary General of the United Nations is coming out and starting to recognize this. I think the world's recognizing that Russia actually has the upper hand, both in terms of the superior position that it currently enjoys, meaning it's in control of the environment, but also from a moral and ethical standpoint. Anybody who takes a close look at this issue realizes that Russia's on the right side of history. Ukraine and the West is not.
Gotcha. Yeah, I also read that India has stopped export of rice. It's like people are panicking, and so then it's like these blood clots. We had a system where the blood is flowing nicely, and now it's clotting around the world out of fear, but that doesn't help anybody. And so, yeah, very, very interesting, everything that's going on. Well, I appreciate you coming on, Scott, giving us an update on what's going on with Russia and Ukraine and the global leaders. This thing, you mentioned Ukraine is trying to make it look like this thing will go on forever. I don't know that it will, but until it's over, you and I will continue to report on it. And I just want to say thank you so much for your time and all the research that you do to help keep us all in the loop on what's happening.
Well, thank you very much for having me on and having access to your audience. I really appreciate it.
Great. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
You too.